The immaterium, more commonly known as the warp, is an infinite and volatile dimension of pure energy. It exists parallel to the material universe, a shadow cast by the physical realm's every thought, feeling, and action. Unlike the material universe, which obeys physical laws, the warp is boundless, mutable, and deeply influenced by the emotions and desires of living beings. It is a realm of infinite potential and unspeakable horror, where time flows in chaotic streams and space defies comprehension. But this enigmatic dimension raises an enduring question. Was it always this way? Was the warp shaped naturally by the psychic resonance of life, or was its existence the result of an external design, a creation born of some purpose? If created, by whom and why? These mysteries have puzzled scholars, priests, and even the most ancient and powerful beings of the Warhammer 40K universe. The warp is not merely a backdrop for galactic travel or a source of demonic incursions. It is a fundamental force that has shaped the destiny of countless species and empires. Civilizations have risen and fallen due to its influence, and some have sought to harness its power, often at great peril. To understand who, or what, may have created the warp, we must first navigate the perilous histories and profound enigmas that surround its existence. At the heart of this inquiry lies an understanding of how the warp interacts with the material universe. It is a place where the immaterial becomes tangible, where thoughts can manifest as storms, and where gods are born from the collective psyche of living beings. The very nature of the immaterium challenges the boundaries of what can be known, blurring the lines between creation and evolution, between purpose and chaos. In this exploration, we will unravel the threads of this cosmic mystery, examining the roles of ancient powers, cataclysmic events, and the ambitions of beings whose understanding of the warp far surpasses humanity's. The answers may lie hidden in the myths of the Old Ones, the arrogance of the Aeldari, or the unknowable designs of chaos itself. Or perhaps the warp's origins are tied to a deeper, more profound truth, one that transcends the understanding of even the universe's most powerful entities. Prepare to step into the void, where the only certainty is uncertainty, and the only guide is the will to seek the truth. The origins of the warp may hold the key to understanding not only its past, but also its potential future. Yet, as with all things touched by the warp, knowledge comes at a price, and the answers may be as dangerous as the questions themselves. The question of who created the warp is as vast and complex as the immaterium itself, but certain factions, entities, and figures emerge as central to this mystery. To unravel this enigma, we must examine those whose actions, knowledge, or existence intertwine with the very fabric of the warp. Among the earliest known players in this narrative are the Old Ones, a mysterious and ancient race credited with godlike powers. Renowned for their mastery of the warp and their ability to shape entire species, the Old Ones were architects of life across the galaxy. Their psychic capabilities allowed them to manipulate the warp for interstellar travel and other arcane purposes. Some believe the Old Ones did not merely use the warp, but played a role in its very creation, or at least its evolution into the realm we know today. They were not, however, without opposition. Their grand designs attracted adversaries that would forever alter the nature of the immaterium. Chief among these adversaries were the C'tan and their servants, the Necrons. The C'tan, star-born entities that fed on the life force of sentient beings, cared little for the warp, viewing it as chaotic and antithetical to their existence. However, their war with the Old Ones indirectly shaped the warp, as the psychic energies unleashed during their conflict stirred the immaterium into a tempest of raw emotion and power. While the C'tan were not creators of the warp, their influence was an undeniable catalyst in its turbulent development. Another key faction is the Aeldari, or Eldar, whose psychic might has been both a boon and a curse. The Aeldari were not present during the warp's inception, but their actions have profoundly impacted its current state. Their hedonistic excesses led to the birth of Slaanesh, the chaos god of excess, forever scarring the warp with her emergence. Though not creators of the warp itself, the Eldari's arrogance and unchecked emotions amplified its instability, leaving an indelible mark on its nature. Of course, no discussion of the warp would be complete without addressing the Chaos Gods. These entities, Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh, are intrinsically tied to the Immaterium, born from the collective emotions and psychic resonance of living beings. Some argue that the Chaos Gods are the true creators of the warp in its modern form, as their presence and influence dominate its ever-changing landscape. However, their emergence is widely considered a byproduct of mortal emotions rather than a deliberate act of creation. Still, their power is absolute within the warp, and their agendas are intricately linked to its existence. Another enigmatic presence tied to the warp is the Emperor of Mankind. His unparalleled psychic abilities and understanding of the Immaterium suggest a deep connection to its mysteries. While he is not believed to have created the warp, his manipulation of its energies and his role in the Webway project hint at knowledge that surpasses even that of the ancient races. The Emperor's actions have shaped humanity's understanding of the warp, but his true intentions remain shrouded in secrecy. Then there are the Orcs, whose relationship with the warp is crude but undeniable. Their collective psychic energy fuels the existence of Gork and Mork, entities that blur the line between gods and manifestations of belief. Though the Orcs lack the sophistication to consciously shape the warp, their presence within it demonstrates the profound impact of collective thought on its nature. Finally, the Necrons, while not directly involved in the warp's creation, are an essential piece of the puzzle. Their hatred of the Immaterium and their efforts to suppress it have left a lasting imprint on its history. The Necrons' wars against the Old Ones and their creation of the Catan reflect a desire to eradicate the warp's influence rather than understand or control it. In summation, the creation of the warp cannot be attributed to a single faction or individual. Instead, it is the product of countless interactions, conflicts, and ambitions, each leaving its mark on this incomprehensible realm. From the enigmatic Old Ones and their ancient enemies to the Chaos Gods and the hubris of mortal races, the story of the warp's creation is one of complexity and chaos, much like the warp itself. The creation of the warp, or its transformation into the volatile dimension we now know, stems from the interplay of immense psychic energies, vast cosmic phenomena, and the resonance of countless sentient minds. Before it became the tumultuous sea of emotion and power, the warp existed in a far more tranquil state, a realm of latent potential, untouched by the turbulence that now defines it. Its foundation was not crafted in a physical sense, as the material universe was, but was instead a metaphysical construct, formed and shaped by the unseen forces that weave through existence. At the heart of this process were the raw energies of the Immaterium, a primordial field of boundless potential that mirrored the physical universe. In its nascent state, the warp was a reflection of the cosmos, its still waters rippling faintly with the faint impressions of existence. This early state was not inherently chaotic or dangerous. It was neutral, a blank slate upon which the events of the universe would later write their chaos and order. The material from which the warp was shaped is best understood as the psychic emanations of living beings. Every thought, every emotion, and every act of sentient creatures left a subtle imprint on this ethereal realm. These psychic echoes began to accumulate and intertwine, forming currents and eddies within the warp's fabric. Over time, as sentient life proliferated across the galaxy, these currents grew stronger and more pronounced, giving rise to the early signs of the dimension's instability. Adding to this psychic foundation were the immense celestial events that marked the universe's early history. The birth and death of stars, the violent formation of galaxies, and the collision of immense cosmic bodies all left their own imprints on the warp. These grand-scale events created ripples in the Immaterium, further shaping its character and laying the groundwork for the turbulent realm it would eventually become. The process of shaping the warp was not immediate nor intentional. It unfolded over millennia as layer upon layer of psychic residue accumulated. The ancient races that predated humanity contributed to this shaping in profound ways, even if indirectly. Their psychic abilities, whether used in peace or in conflict, sent waves through the warp, altering its nature and sowing the seeds of its eventual transformation. The more psychically potent a species, the greater their impact on the warp's development. This slow shaping of the immaterium was not without its challenges. The very nature of psychic energy, boundless and volatile, made it difficult to contain or direct. The process of forming and influencing the warp was akin to sculpting a storm or harnessing the tides of an endless ocean. The complexity of this undertaking would have been unimaginable to mortal minds, requiring knowledge and power far beyond what most species could comprehend. While the exact origins of the warp remain obscured by the passage of time, it is clear that its creation was a cumulative process. It was not the product of a singular event or entity, but rather the convergence of countless factors, psychic, cosmic, and metaphysical. The interplay of these forces gave rise to a realm that mirrored the complexity and chaos of the material universe, albeit on a far grander and more incomprehensible scale. Thus, the immaterium as it exists today is a testament to the boundless power of the psychic and the indelible impact of existence itself. It is a realm born not of stone or flame, but of thought and emotion, forged in the crucible of cosmic history. This foundation, though seemingly intangible, laid the groundwork for the warp's eventual transformation into the chaotic and unpredictable dimension we now know, a transformation driven by forces and events that would forever alter the course of galactic history. The creation and evolution of the warp into the realm we know today was not a single act, but a gradual process that required tremendous sacrifices, immense power, and the unrelenting will of those involved. The shaping of this dimension was marked by distinct stages, each driven by a combination of necessity and ambition and fueled by resources that defied comprehension. The initial stage began with the first deliberate manipulations of the immaterium by ancient entities. These early efforts to harness its potential demanded the expenditure of vast psychic energy. The beings responsible for these manipulations, whether natural-born psychics or those who discovered the dimension through technological or mystical means, had to focus their collective power to breach the veil between the material universe and the warp. This required enormous sacrifices, often in the form of life energy or the destruction of entire ecosystems, to generate the psychic force necessary to stabilize their interactions with this volatile dimension. The second stage involved the establishment of rudimentary pathways through the warp. These early attempts to traverse or influence the immaterium relied on the construction of psychic conduits and nexuses that acted as stabilizing points. Such efforts were fraught with peril, as even the slightest miscalculation could result in catastrophic feedback, consuming those involved and unleashing destructive forces upon their civilizations. Entire populations were sometimes sacrificed to fuel these experiments, their psychic essence serving as the foundation for the structures and tools needed to pierce deeper into the immaterium's mysteries. In the third stage, the complexity of these efforts increased as the manipulators of the warp began to shape it for specific purposes. This was no longer about simply accessing the immaterium, but about crafting regions within it to suit their needs. This stage required a level of precision and understanding far beyond what had been achieved before. To shape even a small portion of the warp, tremendous energy sources were funneled into the immaterium. Some civilizations went so far as to bind the psychic essence of their own kind into intricate patterns, creating living constructs or sentient conduits to amplify their control over this unstable realm. The fourth stage marked a turning point in the process, as the strain of these efforts began to exact a toll not just on those directly involved, but on entire worlds and species. The immense forces required to shape the warp led to cascading effects in both dimensions, tearing apart physical environments and unleashing psychic storms that ravaged planets. Many of those who sought to control the warp were undone by their own ambitions. their civilizations crumbling under the weight of the sacrifices demanded by their work. Yet, the knowledge they uncovered did not vanish. It was passed on or rediscovered by others who continued the process, often repeating the same mistakes. The final stage of the warp's shaping was characterized by the emergence of sentient entities within the immaterium. These beings, born from the collective psychic resonance of countless sacrifices and efforts, began to exert their own will upon the dimension. While this stage was not the deliberate intent of its creators, it became an inevitable consequence of their actions. The once neutral immaterium was now a volatile and reactive realm, dominated by forces that no longer answered solely to the will of its shapers. By this point, those who had sought to create or control the warp found themselves facing a dimension that had evolved beyond their comprehension, its power no longer theirs to command. Throughout each stage, the common thread was the price paid to shape the warp. The sacrifices made were staggering: countless lives, the destruction of thriving worlds, and the expenditure of psychic energy on a scale that defies understanding. These efforts demanded the cooperation of vast networks of psychics, the construction of artifacts capable of withstanding the immaterium's turbulence, and the unwavering determination of those who sought to master this dangerous realm. Each step forward came at a cost, and those costs left scars not only on the material universe, but on the immaterium itself, shaping it into the unpredictable force it remains today. The pivotal moment in the warp's creation was not a singular act of engineering or mysticism, but a deliberate decision driven by necessity and ambition. The dimension was not merely discovered or stumbled upon. It was shaped and altered with intent. Its ultimate purpose was multifaceted, serving as both a tool and a weapon, designed to fulfill the conflicting agendas of the beings and civilizations that manipulated it. The primary motivation behind the creation and manipulation of the warp was control over the vast expanse of the galaxy. The material universe, bound by the constraints of physical laws, presented insurmountable barriers to those seeking to expand their influence and sustain their empires. The warp offered a solution, a means to circumvent the limitations of space and time. By creating pathways and stabilizing its chaotic energy, its manipulators sought to establish a system of near instantaneous travel and communication. This was especially crucial for the ancient architects of galactic civilization, who recognized the impossibility of maintaining cohesive control over distant star systems through conventional means. At its core, the decision to create or manipulate the warp was born of ambition, the desire to transcend mortal limitations and wield power on an unprecedented scale. For the most ancient and advanced beings, such as the Old Ones, the warp represented a reservoir of infinite potential. Its energies could be used to shape worlds, empower species, and even alter the fabric of reality itself. They envisioned the immaterium as a tool for creation, one that could be harnessed to forge a galaxy teeming with life and interconnected by a web of psychic energy. However, this decision was not without conflict or ulterior motives. The creation of the warp was not a singular project overseen by a unified group, but a contested battleground of competing interests. Some sought to use the immaterium for enlightenment and progress, while others saw it as a weapon to subjugate their enemies and consolidate power. For many, the warp was a means to an end, a mechanism to secure dominance over rival factions or races. The decision to weaponize the warp fundamentally altered its nature. Once seen as a realm of boundless possibility, it became a source of fear and destruction. Those who sought to dominate the warp turned its energies inward, exploiting its volatile nature to unleash devastating forces upon their adversaries. Psychic storms, dimensional ruptures, and the summoning of destructive entities became tools of war, reshaping the balance of power in the galaxy. The most significant shift in the warp's purpose came with the realization of its capacity to amplify emotion. The beings that manipulated the immaterium discovered that the raw psychic energy of fear, rage, ambition, and despair could be harnessed and weaponized. This revelation marked a turning point as the warp transitioned from a realm of potential to one of chaos. The decision to exploit the psychic resonance of sentient life gave rise to a dimension increasingly hostile to those who sought to use it. For some, the warp's creation served a more abstract purpose. It became a mirror of the universe's complexity, a reflection of its creator's desires and fears. This duality, the capacity for creation and destruction, meant the warp could never truly be controlled. Those who attempted to shape it found themselves subject to its unpredictable nature, and the line between master and victim blurred as the immaterium evolved into a force beyond their comprehension. In the end, the decision to create and manipulate the warp was both a triumph and a tragedy. Its intended purpose, to unite, empower, and expand, was overshadowed by the unforeseen consequences of its exploitation. The ambition that drove its creation sowed the seeds of its corruption, transforming the warp from a tool of progress into a crucible of chaos. Its manipulators succeeded in achieving their immediate goals, but failed to foresee the long-term ramifications, setting the stage for an eternal struggle over the dimension's power and purpose. The creation and manipulation of the warp had profound and far-reaching effects on the galaxy, fundamentally altering its balance of power, the structure of civilizations, and the dynamics of existence itself. What began as a tool for advancement and expansion evolved into an unpredictable and volatile force that reshaped the destiny of countless species. The very fabric of reality was changed as the warp's presence became an integral and inescapable part of the galaxy. The first and most immediate impact was the introduction of faster-than-light travel, which revolutionized the ability of civilizations to expand and interact across vast interstellar distances. Warp travel allowed species to transcend the constraints of physical space, establishing empires that spanned the galaxy. It was a double-edged sword. While it enabled unprecedented growth and connectivity, it also brought with it the dangers of unpredictability, as journeys through the warp became fraught with peril. Many ships and entire fleets were lost to the roiling chaos of the immaterium, their crews consumed by the very forces they sought to harness. The influence of the warp extended beyond travel, deeply embedding itself in the evolution of societies and species. Psychic abilities, once rare and mysterious, became increasingly prominent, shaping cultures and hierarchies. Some species saw these abilities as divine gifts, while others viewed them as dangerous mutations. Entire civilizations rose to power by mastering these abilities, building their dominance on the manipulation of the immaterium. However, reliance on psychic power also exposed them to the inherent dangers of the warp, making them vulnerable to its capricious nature and the malevolent entities that emerged within it. The rise of warp entities, born from the collective emotions and thoughts of sentient beings, marked another significant shift in the galaxy. The emergence of these entities destabilized the balance of power, introducing a new dimension of conflict. No longer was war confined to the material universe. It spilled into the immaterium, where battles of will and emotion played out on a scale beyond mortal comprehension. The presence of these entities also disrupted the natural order, as their influence seeped into the material realm, corrupting individuals, institutions, and entire worlds. The existence of the warp also transformed the nature of warfare. Traditional weapons and tactics were often rendered ineffective in the face of the immaterium's unpredictable forces. Armies and fleets had to adapt to contend with threats that defied physical laws, leading to the development of new technologies and strategies. Psychic warfare became a central aspect of galactic conflicts, with some factions leveraging their mastery of the warp to devastating effect. This shift in military dynamics further reinforced the dominance of those who could control the immaterium, while leaving others struggling to survive in its shadow. On a broader scale, the warp's creation fractured the unity of the galaxy. It became a source of division and conflict as factions competed for control over its power. The instability of the immaterium created rifts between civilizations as distrust and fear of its dangers grew. Entire alliances crumbled under the weight of the warp's influence as mistrust of psychic users and the entities within the immaterium sowed discord. The promise of unity that the warp initially offered was replaced by an enduring fragmentation that continues to shape the galaxy. The most profound impact of the warp's creation, however, was on the spiritual and existential understanding of the galaxy's inhabitants. The immaterium became the domain of gods and demons, its energies perceived as both a blessing and a curse. Religions and philosophies arose to explain its mysteries, often interpreting the warp as a battleground between good and evil, creation and destruction. These interpretations, in turn, fueled the immaterium itself, creating a self-perpetuating cycle where belief shaped reality and reality reinforced belief. Ultimately, the creation of the warp transformed the galaxy into a far more dangerous and complex place. It magnified the ambitions and fears of its inhabitants, amplifying both their potential and their flaws. While it brought new possibilities and powers, it also introduced existential risks that threatened the very survival of civilizations. The balance of power was forever altered, as the immaterium became an omnipresent force that no faction or individual could fully escape or control. The galaxy was irrevocably changed, its destiny bound to the unpredictable tides of the warp. The warp, as a cornerstone of the Warhammer 40K universe, is surrounded by layers of mystery and complexity, many of which provoke endless debates within the fan community. Among the most intriguing aspects are the unique mechanics of the immaterium and the way it interacts with reality, creating phenomena that defy the understanding of even the most advanced civilizations. One of the most fascinating and widely discussed features of the warp is its relationship with time. Within the immaterium, time does not flow linearly, as it does in the material universe. This has led to countless theories about its nature and implications. Time's malleability in the warp has resulted in paradoxes where ships have arrived at their destinations before they departed, or disappeared for millennia, only to re-emerge unchanged. This aspect not only complicates navigation, but also raises philosophical questions about causality and destiny, fueling speculation that the warp may hold answers to the ultimate nature of existence. Another unique aspect of the warp lies in its ability to manifest the collective emotions and beliefs of sentient beings. This phenomenon is perhaps its most defining characteristic, as it suggests that the immaterium is, in a sense, shaped by the material universe rather than being entirely separate from it. This feedback loop between thought and reality has sparked debates about whether the warp was always meant to be chaotic, or if its current state is the unintended result of mortal actions. This interaction also opens the door to the idea that the immaterium could be altered or even healed through changes in the collective psyche, a notion that is as tantalizing as it is implausible given the scale required. The concept of psychic resonance in the warp also highlights its peculiar mechanics. Psychic individuals act as conduits for immaterium energy, with their abilities often influenced by the strength of their connection to the dimension. This has led to the widespread belief that the warp is not just a place, but a living, reactive force that responds to psychic activity. This idea gives rise to the concept of psychic tides, massive flows of warp energy that can alter entire regions of the galaxy. These tides, while poorly understood, are thought to correlate with significant events in the material universe, suggesting a deep and intricate connection between the two realms. The existence of warp storms is another captivating topic that often surfaces in fan discussions. These storms, massive and unpredictable outbursts of immaterium energy, are both a curse and a blessing to the galaxy. On one hand, they can sever entire star systems from the rest of the universe, trapping inhabitants in isolation for centuries. On the other hand, they can act as natural barriers, preventing invasions or shielding vulnerable worlds. The origins and triggers of these storms remain enigmatic, though many speculate they are tied to intense bursts of emotion or large-scale psychic events, further underscoring the warp's reactive nature. The idea of the warp as a domain of infinite dimensions and layers also intrigues many. Unlike the physical universe, the immaterium does not conform to three-dimensional space. Instead, it is described as an ever-shifting, boundless expanse where distance and direction hold no meaning. This lack of structure allows for phenomena such as warp gates and the webway, ancient constructs that bypass the immaterium's chaos to provide relatively safe passage. The existence of these pathways raises questions about the true scope of the warp and whether it contains hidden realms or undiscovered secrets far beyond what is currently known. Perhaps the most controversial and debated aspect is the role of the Chaos Gods in defining the warp's current state. Many fans question whether the Chaos Gods were inevitable products of the immaterium or if their creation was an anomaly brought about by specific actions in the material universe. This debate touches on the larger question of whether the warp can ever return to a more neutral state or if its corruption is permanent. The Chaos God's influence not only shapes the immaterium but also spills into the material world, blurring the lines between the two and ensuring their continued relevance in any discussion about the warp's nature. Finally, the concept of alternate interpretations of the warp adds another layer of intrigue. While most view it as a chaotic and dangerous realm, some speculate that it could also represent untapped potential for growth and unity. This idea is particularly appealing to those who imagine a future where the immaterium becomes a force for creation rather than destruction. Such notions remain speculative and unlikely, given the entrenched nature of its corruption, but they highlight the enduring fascination with the warp as a realm of both horror and possibility. The warp, as it exists today, owes much of its nature to the influence of certain key individuals and entities whose actions, ambitions, and flaws have left indelible marks on this chaotic dimension. These figures, whether mortal, immortal, or something in between, have shaped the immaterium into the volatile realm it has become, each contributing in their unique ways to its current state. Among the most influential are the Chaos Gods, entities whose emergence and continued existence define the immaterium. Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh embody primal aspects of mortal emotion and ambition, and their presence has irrevocably altered the warp. Khorne, the manifestation of rage and bloodlust, thrives on violence and war, shaping vast regions of the warp into arenas of endless slaughter. Tzeentch, the god of change and deceit, wields unmatched cunning, twisting the fabric of the immaterium into intricate mazes of schemes and possibilities. Nurgle, embodying decay and despair, transforms parts of the warp into realms of rot and stagnation, a reflection of his eternal paradox of life and death. Slaanesh, born of indulgence and excess, carved an unforgettable scar into the immaterium with their creation, turning entire sectors of the warp into realms of both unparalleled beauty and unimaginable horror. These gods, however, did not emerge spontaneously, but were born from the psychic resonance of mortal civilizations. Their rise is intrinsically linked to the emotions and actions of countless beings, and they continue to evolve, fueled by the thoughts and feelings of the living. Their strength lies in their ability to manipulate these emotions, but their dependency on mortals is also a critical vulnerability, as their power waxes and wanes with the tides of belief. Beyond the Chaos Gods, there are mortal figures who have directly impacted the warp, shaping its role in galactic history. One of the most prominent is the Emperor of Mankind, whose psychic might and understanding of the immaterium allowed him to attempt feats no other being dared to undertake. The Emperor's efforts to use the webway to bypass the dangers of warp travel reflect both his ambition and his hubris. While his intentions were to protect humanity from the immaterium's corruption, his failure to complete this project due to treachery resulted in an even deeper entanglement of humanity with the warp. His psychic beacon, the Astronomicon, remains a vital tool for navigation, but it also acts as a constant lure for entities within the immaterium, exposing his creation to their predations. Eldar figures also play a critical role in shaping the warp. Chief among them is the Laughing God, Segorak, who stands as a rare counterpoint to the destructive forces within the Immaterium. Segorak's influence is subtle yet profound, as he manipulates events to undermine chaos while protecting the remnants of the Eldar race. His mastery of deception and his ability to navigate the Immaterium make him a singular force within its vast expanse, but his reliance on secrecy and misdirection often limits his ability to enact sweeping change. The Aldari themselves have given rise to another significant entity in the form of Innead, the nascent god of death. While not yet fully realized, Innead represents a potential force of opposition to chaos, drawing power from the souls of the Aldari dead. This being's emergence reflects the enduring impact of the Eldar's tragic history on the Immaterium and their ongoing efforts to shape its future. Even among humans, there are individuals whose actions within the warp have left lasting legacies. Navigators, psychers, and sorcerers, while often overlooked in discussions of grand cosmic events, have played pivotal roles in shaping how humanity interacts with the Immaterium. Their courage, recklessness, and ambition have opened paths through the warp, uncovered its secrets, and occasionally unleashed horrors beyond comprehension. The Necrons, though not users of the warp, have also influenced its development through their wars with the Old Ones. Figures like Sarek, the Silent King, made decisions during those ancient conflicts that indirectly led to the intensification of the warp's instability. By driving the Old Ones to rely increasingly on psychic creations, Zarek and his kind forced events that would later amplify the Immaterium's volatility. Lastly, the beings known as demons, though often seen as mere extensions of the Chaos Gods, have identities and ambitions of their own. Figures like Kairos Fateweaver, Scarbrand, and Kugath Plaguefather wield immense power within the Immaterium, shaping its regions and serving as instruments of their patron's will. Their actions have directly affected the balance of power within the warp, creating alliances, rivalries, and conflicts that reverberate into the material universe. These individuals and entities, whether gods, mortals, or something beyond, represent the driving forces behind the warp's evolution. Their strengths, such as immense psychic power or strategic brilliance, are often matched by fatal flaws, hubris, dependence, or blind ambition that ensure the Immaterium remains a chaotic and unpredictable force within the galaxy. Their legacies are written in the ever-shifting tides of the warp, leaving a realm both shaped and scarred by their influence. The warp's origins and purpose remain a topic of intense debate, both within the Warhammer 40K universe and among its fanbase. Numerous theories attempt to explain its creation, evolution, and the reasons behind its chaotic state. These unresolved questions add to the mystique of the Immaterium, with each possibility offering a different perspective on the events that shaped the galaxy. One of the most debated points is whether the warp was always destined to become the chaotic realm it is today. Some theorists argue that its current state is a direct consequence of its interaction with mortal emotions, a reflection of the galaxy's turmoil. This raises the question of whether a more peaceful or harmonious galaxy could have resulted in a different, more stable warp. If the civilizations that contributed to its shaping, such as the Old Ones or the Eldar, had made different choices, perhaps seeking unity rather than dominance, would the warp have remained a neutral, untapped potential rather than a source of destruction? Another unresolved question is whether the warp's creation was intentional or accidental. While its evolution into a tool for faster-than-light travel and psychic amplification suggests deliberate manipulation, some believe the Immaterium existed in a primordial form long before sentient beings began to shape it. If it was always present, did any being or force truly create it? Or was it an inevitable counterpart to the material universe? This philosophical question touches on the nature of existence itself and whether the warp represents a cosmic inevitability or a colossal error in judgment by those who first tapped into it. The possibility that the warp could have been shaped differently by another civilization or entity adds further intrigue. If the Necrons, rather than the Old Ones, had dominated the galaxy during the warp's formative period, would their disdain for psychic energy have suppressed its development? Alternatively, if a purely logical or emotionless race had attempted to shape the warp, could they have eliminated its chaotic tendencies altogether? This line of thought often leads to speculation about how different the galaxy might have been had its early power dynamics played out differently. A particularly tantalizing theory revolves around the idea that the warp was deliberately corrupted. Some argue that a specific faction or entity might have introduced instability into the Immaterium to use it as a weapon against their enemies. If true, this would imply that the warp's current state was not an accidental evolution, but a deliberate act of sabotage. Identifying the perpetrator of such an act, however, remains an enigma. Was it a desperate gambit by the Old Ones in their war against the Necrons? Or perhaps the result of an unknown force seeking to disrupt the balance of the universe? Another widely discussed topic is whether the warp could ever be healed or restored to its primordial state. Proponents of this theory suggest that eliminating the Chaos Gods and suppressing the psychic resonance of mortal emotions might stabilize the Immaterium. However, the practicality of such a feat is highly questionable given the entrenched nature of the Chaos Gods and the vast scale of psychic influence across the galaxy. Still, the idea persists, sparking debates about whether the galaxy's inhabitants are doomed to live with the warp as it is, or if redemption is possible. The question of alternative dimensions also fuels speculation. If the warp is just one reflection of the material universe, could other dimensions exist with entirely different properties? Some theorists believe that the webway, a separate yet intertwined dimension, hints at the existence of multiple planes of reality. If so, might the warp's chaotic nature be unique, and could other dimensions offer insights into how it might have developed differently? This theory expands the conversation beyond the Immaterium, suggesting that its creation and state might be part of a broader cosmic puzzle. Finally, the role of belief and perception in shaping the warp remains a contentious issue. If the Immaterium is influenced by thought and emotion, could collective belief redefine its very nature? This raises profound questions about the power of civilizations to reshape their reality. If the galaxy's inhabitants could unite under a singular vision, whether of peace, order, or something else, might they be able to exert control over the warp? Or is its chaotic nature too deeply rooted to ever be altered? These unresolved questions and theories ensure that the warp remains one of the most compelling and mysterious aspects of the Warhammer 40K universe. Its origins, purpose, and potential for change are topics of endless fascination, inviting fans and scholars alike to ponder its role in the galaxy's past, present, and future. The long-term consequences of the warp's creation ripple endlessly through the galaxy, shaping every facet of existence and ensuring its role as both a source of power and a harbinger of ruin. The Immaterium is not simply a backdrop to the events of the universe. It is a central force that will continue to influence the destiny of countless civilizations. The question of whether the warp could ever be destroyed or fundamentally altered by its creators, or by those who now wield its power, remains one of the most consequential and speculative debates in the galaxy. The existence of the warp has ensured that the galaxy is perpetually locked in a cycle of creation and destruction. On one hand, it enables faster-than-light travel, psychic communication, and the existence of incredible powers that would otherwise be impossible. On the other hand, it is a source of endless conflict, fueling wars, corrupting minds, and spawning threats that no empire, no matter how advanced, can fully control. These dualities suggest that any change to the warp, whether its destruction or transformation, would have profound consequences that could tip the balance of power in unforeseen ways. If the warp were to be destroyed, the immediate ramifications would be catastrophic. The Imperium of Man, reliant on the Astronomicon for navigation and the psychic powers of its psychers, would be plunged into chaos. Warp travel would cease, severing star systems from one another and ending the galactic empires as they currently exist. Entire civilizations would collapse as their ability to communicate and interact across vast distances disappeared. While the removal of the warp would eliminate the threat of chaos and demonic incursions, the loss of its benefits would likely lead to a dark age far worse than the current era of strife. Yet, there are those who speculate that the warp could be redefined rather than destroyed. If its creators, or those with sufficient understanding of its mechanics, could reshape the immaterium into a more stable or neutral state, it might retain its utility without the chaos and corruption that currently define it. Such an endeavor would require unimaginable power and knowledge, far beyond what any existing faction currently possesses. Moreover, it would necessitate a level of unity and cooperation across the galaxy that seems almost impossible given the current fractured state of its inhabitants. The prospect of reshaping the warp raises critical questions about who would oversee such a transformation. If one faction were to gain control over the immaterium, their vision would inevitably shape its new state. This would likely lead to a galaxy dominated by their ideology, potentially creating a new form of tyranny or oppression. Even if their intentions were pure, the unintended consequences of manipulating such a vast and volatile force could create new threats, replacing the chaos of the warp with dangers of an entirely different nature. Another possibility lies in the continued evolution of the warp itself. As the psychic imprint of the galaxy's inhabitants continues to change, the immaterium might naturally shift in response. This evolution could lead to the emergence of new entities, new realms within the warp, or even a change in the nature of the Chaos Gods themselves. Such developments would likely be gradual and unpredictable, but they could offer opportunities for those seeking to exploit or influence the warp for their own ends. The question of whether the warp's original creators, or those who have since shaped it, could destroy it remains highly contentious. If the immaterium was created as a deliberate construct, it stands to reason that it could theoretically be unmade by those with sufficient knowledge. However, the scale of such an undertaking would be unprecedented, potentially requiring the sacrifice of entire civilizations or the alignment of forces that have been at war for millennia. The risks involved would be astronomical, as the destruction of the warp could destabilize the fabric of the universe itself, leading to outcomes even more catastrophic than its continued existence. Even if the warp cannot be destroyed, efforts to limit its influence could redefine the galaxy's future. Technologies or practices that suppress psychic activity, contain warp energies, or shield civilizations from its effects could mitigate its dangers while preserving its benefits. However, such measures would likely provoke fierce resistance from those who rely on the immaterium for power, creating new conflicts that could shape the galaxy for millennia to come. Ultimately, the long-term significance of the warp lies in its dual role as both a lifeline and a curse. It embodies the potential for growth, connection, and power, but it also reflects the darkest aspects of existence: fear, ambition, and destruction. Whether it is destroyed, transformed, or allowed to evolve unchecked, the fate of the warp will determine the fate of the galaxy. Its creators, its manipulators, and its victims all share a role in this unfolding drama, ensuring that the immaterium remains a force of endless fascination and fear.